Hello, and welcome back to Ronald Talks Difficult Literature. This is episode 3, and we will be discussing Animal Farm today by George Orwell. And as you know, on this show, we take classic works of literature that many of us have found to be difficult in the past for whatever reason, and we discuss them in a pub-like atmosphere or maybe a coffee house. And we will ask and try to answer 3 questions on every episode. And the first one being, who is this usually assigned to? Who is the intended audience? That's number 1. Why is this considered difficult by many people? And number 3, was it enjoyable or should we just pour this brew out? So on today's episode, as I mentioned, we will be discussing George Orwell's Animal Farm. And I'm excited to say we because I have a special guest host. And she happens to be my niece, Shelby Russell. And we will introduce her. But first, it's my podcast. So here we go. Let's talk about me real fast. I'm Ronald. I'm a would-be humanist, self-learner with no formal training in literature. I'm on a mission to read and understand as much classic literature as possible. My hobbies include home brewing, running, beer judging. I perform in a local cover band on occasion, but the one hobby that I do every day is read, mostly classic literature. So thanks for joining us today, but I really want to get to our co-host, Shelby Russell. Shelby, please introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for having me today. Glad to be here. I'm here as a guest host and very much the voice of the audience. I'm definitely not an academic or an expert. I'm just someone who's curious and ready to ask the questions we're all probably thinking. I've always loved to read, but I think I've stayed away from literature that seemed too difficult for me to understand in the past. This year, one of my goals has been to try to tackle some classic literature that always felt too intimidating, and Animal Farm seemed like an easy place to start. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay, let's do this. The tagline here is, let's turn the page and talk about Animal Farm by George Orwell. And just real briefly, Animal Farm is a satire. It basically explains the Soviet Revolution, all the way how it developed into this hierarchical society, basically totalitarianism government run by Stalin by the time World War II came around. So it covers a time span of from 1917 to about 1943. George Orwell wrote this in 43. And I just want to say real quickly, at the end of the text is a preface that George Orwell wrote to the Ukrainian people, and he assumed they didn't know anything about him, and he put this is where I got this information from, and I just thought it was telling it. To me, it tells why he wanted to write Animal Farm in the first place. And real quickly, I'll just go through the biography, and it's an autobiography because he wrote it. And this is literally line by line from that preface to the Ukrainian people. Orwell was born in 1903. He's British, but he was born in India. His father was an official in the English administration there. And as a young man in his 20s, George Orwell, served in the Indian Imperial Police. And he learned, over that 5 years, he learned to despise imperialism. And he became interested in socialism. He dropped out of the police force. He started writing. He got married in 1936, and almost immediately he and his wife went to Spain to fight in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the Spanish government. And he joined an organization called the Spanish Trotskyists. Leon Trotsky was he was involved in the revolution. He was kind of the part of the brain trust, and he was a very idealistic socialist. He was influenced by Engels and Karl Marx, and then he, in turn, influenced a lot of other people, and eventually he was instrumental in helping overthrow the government in Russia at the time and successfully pull off the revolution. But Orwell says his experience in Spain taught me how easily totalitarian propaganda can control the opinion of enlightened people in democratic countries. And I think that's what he does here. He basically shows how the power of language is used to manipulate people, and they end up thinking they're doing something for the good of themselves, and they end up in a very bad situation. So he saw the USSR of 1917. He saw that it had transformed from a socialist society to a hierarchical society. And that's fun to say. But it really annoyed him that people equated the Russia of 1930s to the Russia of 1917. Because in 1917, Lenin became the leader. And after his death, which was only a couple of years into the regime or after the revolution, Stalin took over in very much the way this book depicts it. And by the 1930s, he was having people executed. It was called the Purge. And that's not socialism. It's something else. And so it annoyed Orwell that people equated the two. And when I read this in the 80s, we were taught this in school. It was more an anti-communist thing, but not a pro-socialist bent as we learned it. And we were still at the very end of the Cold War, so it was interesting. So he became motivated. George Orwell became motivated to destroy the Soviet myth in hopes of reviving the socialist movement. So that's where it came from. He got the idea. He saw this young boy on an ox cart, driving an ox cart with this huge horse, reminiscent of a horse in this story. And this boy's whipping this horse when it tries to turn. And Orwell says, "It struck me that if such animals became aware of their strength, we should have no power over them, and that men exploit animals in such the same way as the rich exploit the poor." And, rich and poor, bourgeoisie and proletariat, these are very much socialist ideas. In 1943, he wrote out the story, and all these episodes that are in there take place. They parallel historical events almost in order, slightly out of order, but that doesn't matter. He drives the point home. This is a historical retelling. It's a satire, but it's definitely a historical retelling. And when we do this on this show, I like to think about 3 time periods: when the action in the story takes place, when the story was actually written, and then the time period we are in today when we are consuming this material. I think the action takes place pretty much right around the turn of the century. And they don't say that in the story, but they do mention certain technology like dynamos. And the idea of socialism really became popular in the late 1800s. And then by 1917, it was popular enough to get enough people together to have a revolution. I think that time period's right. Turn of the century, of the 20th century. So right around 1900. And I do think the time period parallels from 1917 to 1943. This story was written in 1943. This is during World War II, and England was undergoing all this bombing. They were having to ration food. They wanted to win the war. Orwell's really worried about the reputation of socialism. They were worried about staying alive. So that's when that was written. And today we're discussing this in an interesting time period. We are still discussing socialism and fascism and totalitarianism on all social media. How many million times a day this stuff gets talked about? So tell me your experience with Animal Farm, Shelby.
Sure. So I never had to read Animal Farm as any sort of school curriculum. I was never assigned it, but it's one of those that I've always heard people talk about and how important it is. It always seemed really intimidating to me because it tackles difficult political topics, but the whole point of the book is to make these topics, to introduce them in a way that anyone can understand. And as someone who just read it for the first time, I think it does a pretty good job at that.
Yeah, I do too. I like that the story's easy to read, and I like to tell it with these farm animals.
Yeah.
But it's difficult, right? Some of the stuff that happens is really difficult. So to me, the thing that makes it difficult is not only the I don't want to spoil the plot, but there are some executions in here. Those are difficult, right? But and some of the political ideology is difficult. So now we've established that we're not pretending this is easy. Let's just walk through the story itself, and I'll try to be as brief as I can with this. We'll go chapter by chapter. There are 10 chapters. The book starts with a drunk Mr. Jones of Manor Farm. He's locking up the hen house, and he's making his way to bed for the night. An old Major, a prize boar, he calls all the animals together to share this message with them. The dogs come in, the pigs, the hens, the pigeons, the sheep, cows, horses, a donkey, a goat, some ducks, and a cat even comes in. And then Moses, the raven, which I love ravens, so I had to mention that. But Moses is a tame raven for some reason, and they can be tame. But so I got to ask you first: the cat didn't just come in and in lockstep or anything. It just wandered in however it wanted to. But I love that depiction of the cat. So what did you think about it?
Yeah, I also love the cat. I feel like it was very um like exactly what you think a farm cat would act like, just kind of around when it wants to be and missing in action when it doesn't want to be.
Yeah, yeah, that's what cats do, huh? All right, so
Mhm.
Old Major, he starts off by mentioning a dream that he had, and he states that he believes that his days are numbered and he feels he must share something with the animals. And he just launches into the speech outlining the ill treatment of animals by humans, and he shares this vision of a classless animal society where all animals are equal and co-owners of the farm and its production. And it sounds so much like Lenin and Trotsky, Engels and Marx. Goes on to say, man is the only enemy we have. Remove man from the scene, and the root cause of hunger and overwork is abolished forever. Sounds really utopian. And then he teaches them the equivalent of a revolutionary anthem that he couldn't remember, and he suddenly can recall it verse by verse. I'll sing it to you maybe sometime. Any thoughts on the first chapter?
I would love to hear you sing some of Beasts of England for sure. And one thing when I was reading it is Old Major is just such a great name for a pig that wants to start a revolution.
Yeah, for sure. The song is catchy, and I do think does evoke a sort of solidarity. They all are supposed to learn this song, and they do. It becomes a sentimental song for them, almost a revolutionary song. And then towards the end of the book, they still sing it at different events.
Mhm.
So that's chapter one. It's kind of the establishment of the idea of animalism, which Old Major dies in chapter two. And so he's Marx and Lenin, right? And Lenin died very early after the revolution. And there was a little bit of a power vacuum and a struggle for power. So this is where in this story, it parallels history really well. The animals began preparing for a future rebellion led by the pigs, who are generally recognized as being the cleverest of animals. And there are two pigs that take the lead, but they clash on every point. One is Snowball, who I believe is an analog for Trotsky, and Napoleon, who I believe is Stalin. And Trotsky was a larger than life person, an idealist, and he would have been outspoken. And Stalin was kind of a background character, but he was Machiavellian, cunning. And then there's Squealer, who aided these two pigs, and he elaborated Old Major's ideas into this complete system called animalism. And then there's Moses, the raven. And I already said that I liked them, but there was a revolution, and the revolution was against the ideas of the ideals of the time they were living in, and part of that was the Russian Orthodox Church. And I do think Moses represents the Russian Orthodox Church in a way, and he's telling all these people about Sugar Candy Mountain, where this happy country in the sky, and that doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, then Boxer and Clover show up, and these are horses, and they represent blind loyalty, I believe. And then the rebellion happens. They learn this song, and they start practicing this animalism, and they don't really think that the rebellion is going to happen in their lifetime, but they still do these things to prepare, and it happens rather quickly. And Jones is expelled rather quickly from Manor Farm, and the pigs reveal that they have taught themselves to read and write. And so these pigs come up with these 7 commandments, and I want to read them out here because they're instrumental in this story. Number 1 is whatever goes on 2 legs is an enemy. 2, whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Number 3, no animals shall wear clothes. Number 4, no animal shall sleep in a bed. Number 5, no animal shall drink alcohol. 6, no animal shall kill any other animal. And number 7, all animals are equal, period. There's a situation here where Napoleon keeps the cow's milk or the pigs, and it's noticed, but he tells them to go about their work, and they do. All the other animals go about their work. So, what do you think about these characters so far?
Yeah, I thought this chapter did a good job setting up all the characters, kind of setting up the scene. I would personally love to go to Sugar Candy Mountain. It sounds amazing. We see the pigs are already getting a little greedy, a little sneaky. They taught themselves to read and write. And then, those 7 commandments sound great in theory.
Yeah, that last one for sure. But we already have some pigs writing things down.
Yeah.
Chapter 3 is all about them forming a government. So now they've created this idea in chapter 1. Chapter 2, they've had the revolution. Now in chapter 3, they're forming a government. And so the animals do take over the farm, but they work under the supervision of the pigs who do not work. And the animals share the work except for the cat, who always seems to be absent when there was work to be done and always showed up at meal times. And they raise this flag. It's called the hoof and horn, and it's green, flag. But the Soviet flag was red. It was a hammer and sickle, an analog to the Soviet flag. The pigs, they try to teach the other animals to read with varying success. Some could remember the whole alphabet and even read sentences. Some could only remember like the first 4 letters, and like I think Boxer maybe could remember 2 or 3 letters. So they decided it was just too difficult to teach these animals the 7 commandments. They replaced it so with a maxim that's easier to understand. It went 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. They thought animals can understand that. And the sheep really picked up on this maxim.
Hmm.
They used this over and over. So Napoleon had taken the milk, and some of the animals noticed that the pigs are keeping the milk for themselves. Squealer begins his propaganda campaign. Squealer, he's a propaganda machine. It reminds me of the Pravda newspaper of the Soviet Union that basically spun everything in the government's favor. Squealer also had this tagline. Every time he covered something up, he would usually say, "Surely no one wants to see Farmer Jones come back," and he uses this over and over again. So that's chapter 3, where they form the government. What do you think about that? Any comments there?
Yeah, I think there was definitely some interesting commentary here on how not everyone wants to understand or is even capable of understanding complicated political ideologies. And some of the animals can't even read. So making things simpler for the sheep to understand was necessary to try to get everyone on board. And then, yeah, Squealer and his propaganda, I think, really started up in this chapter. And every time I was reading about Squealer when I was reading, I kept picturing Piglet from Winnie the Pooh. Which is funny because I just feel like Piglet is this likable character and Squealer is very well liked on the farm, it seems. So people are like willing to get information from him, even though he's being a little manipulative.
Yeah. Yeah, he's likable, and I think that's why he can manipulate people. He's another larger than life character. So we'll move on to chapter 4, and this is where so now they've got this government going, and they have to defend the farm because the other farmers noticed that there was this takeover, and they're not taking it lightly. And Jones definitely wants his place back. So in chapter 4, Jones attempts to come back and take the farm over. It's a counterattack, and in this counterattack, a sheep is killed and Snowball is wounded. And Boxer and Snowball, they're very instrumental in winning this victory over Jones and his militia. They drive Jones out, but Boxer's this very strong horse, and he actually injures a young militiaman, and he feels bad about it. What they do there after they drive Jones out, the animals bestow this military decoration that they created, Animal Hero First Class. They bestow it on both Snowball and Boxer, and then the sheep that died, they posthumously give Animal Hero Second Class on the dead sheep. That's a short chapter. Any comments there?
Yeah, I think in this chapter, for me, I could tell just how much Snowball actually cares about the farm and the movement. Like, it's very clear that Snowball was fighting very hard in this battle. And we also see what the animals are capable of accomplishing when they are working together, as they were able to defend their farm from the other farmers.
So that's 4 chapters. By the 5th chapter, we're starting to get into the politics, the inner politics of this farm. And, it starts out there is a character named Molly who's this dainty horse who likes to dress up and have ribbons and things like that, and she defects at the beginning of this chapter, and she's a bit of a minor character, but she shows that not everybody was into, this regimented all animals are equal. She still liked to do some of the things that the humans would dress her up, and she thought that was cool, and so she wanted to keep her ribbons, but they wouldn't let her animals wear clothes. Somehow she defected. This is where Snowball and Napoleon really continue to disagree about policy, and Snowball comes up with this idea of building this windmill, so it's going to help things on the farm eventually. And Napoleon says this plan will come to nothing, but he quietly says it in the way that Stalin would do. Snowball and Napoleon continue to disagree about policy. Then, at this point, this is where Napoleon stages a coup, and he's had these dogs and raised them himself, and they made them into these vicious killer type dogs. And as soon as Snowball tells about his windmill idea, Napoleon says it won't work, and then he stages a takeover using these. And Snowball runs away, and he narrowly escapes with his life. Napoleon immediately abolishes all the Sunday meetings they had been having up to that time. And he sets up this special committee of pigs that presided over by himself that would decide the farm operations and communicate their decisions to the other animals. Okay, Squealer, he starts to work his magic again, and he spins the situation to Napoleon's favor and minimizes Snowball's part in the Battle of the Cowshed. That's the battle where Boxer and Snowball performed valiantly, and they even got an award for it. And Squealer, he's kind of minimizes Snowball's part in this whole battle, and he ends his speech by saying, "Surely, comrades, you do not want Farmer Jones back." And so Napoleon announces that the windmill will be built after all. Of course, Squealer clears up any confusion that Napoleon was ever opposed to the windmill, that in fact it was his idea. Craziness.
Yeah, this one was an intense chapter, and the dogs were such a plot twist. Napoleon starts to use force and threats to get what he wants here. And I was just noting that I would be losing my mind on this farm because everything is starting to get contradictory. The animals are getting confused. But yeah, Squealer is here again with his propaganda to try to set the record straight.
Yeah, and they are. It's a good way to put the animals are getting confused. They all right. So that brings us to the next chapter where the politics of the pigs working their own interest. The pigs, they're still running the show, and they're not doing any work, but they start to make the other animals. They force them to work harder to complete their normal farm work and work on this windmill. But it's really exhausting work, and food is starting to become a little scarce. And this is where Napoleon he reverses first of many resolutions. That very first meeting, when they had the revolution, they agreed upon never to engage in trade, never to deal with humans or make use of money. And Napoleon he starts to negotiate with these other farms because they need things. And Squealer convinces the animals that no such resolution was ever passed. Trade begins with this two-legged Mr. Whymper, a human, he's allowed to come on the farm, and he's kind of a go-between with the other farmers. And then the pigs do this thing that they said they shouldn't do, and they openly move into the farmhouse. The common animals, they learn that the pigs also took their meals in the kitchen and slept in beds. I can't remember if it was Molly or something. Well, I thought they said, you thought one of the commandments said that you shouldn't do that. And it was the fourth commandment says, no animal shall sleep in the bed. So they appended to that. Now it reads, pigs changed it. They changed the fourth commandment to say, no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. And so the animals work hard through the summer and the fall, completing about half of this windmill. And in the fall, this raging storm comes in and destroys the windmill. So all that work they did is gone. But somehow Napoleon blamed Snowball for this, stating that he had come onto the animal farm and under cover of night to destroy their work, and then he pronounced a death sentence on Snowball, and he offered a reward for his capture, which is crazy because that actually happened in real life. So getting real on the animal farm. What do you think?
Totally getting real on the farm, and of course, what a convenient time here to blame Snowball. And I thought that it was kind of chilling in the scenes where the animals go back to check on the commandments with their updates, because as we know, most of the animals can't read, and so it's just a real easy little tweak they made to these commandments, and the animals are still feeling a little confused.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so chapter 7. Now in this, we're getting into some serious business now. The winter, it's winter now, and animals are starting to. The police like, we're going to rebuild this windmill, so they start to rebuild the windmill. They build it with thicker walls this time, and Napoleon begins food rationing. And he declares that the hens must give up their eggs to be sold for grain and meal. So again, not only the hens have to give up their eggs, but they're working hard, and they said they weren't going to trade with other people, but they're selling the hens' eggs. Well, some of the chickens protest, and Napoleon cuts off their rations and threatens death to any animal who would give the chickens food. 9 hens die before the chickens go, okay, well, we'll do it. We'll do it. And also, Napoleon circulating rumors of Snowball's alleged hijinks, and Squealer tries to convince the animals that Snowball had been Jones's agent all along. Boxer's like, Boxer was fighting side by side with him at the Battle of Cowshed. He's like, he's having some doubts, but as you said, he's a very loyal comrade. He wasn't sure what to believe, but he went along with Napoleon. He stays loyal. Napoleon continues this purge, or begins a purge, with 4 pigs who had protested back when Napoleon had abolished the Sunday meeting after expelling Snowball. And so he has these 4 pigs executed right there on the spot. And then 3 hens are next, then a goose, and then 3 sheep, and all are executed on the spot. It's crazy. Animal Farm's crazy. All the other animals see this and they don't know what to think, but they're terrified for sure. They don't know what to do, so they just start singing "Beasts of England." And Napoleon's like, "No more singing that song." He was worried about the power of them banding together behind something emotional like that. But he does have the song replaced by this other silly song, and I'm not going to sing that one. But it's so this reminds me a lot of Stalin's purges in the 1930s. He did these kind of things, and hard chapter.
Yeah, this chapter was really hard, and things are getting really bad on the farm. And they were already bad, like the conditions were bad, and now the executions are terrible. The violence has definitely escalated. A lot of the animals are feeling so confused, and they just don't really know what to do about it.
Yeah, they're starting to wonder if they were better off under Jones's, rule, his tyranny. Because Napoleon is so bad. Now we're in chapter 8. The 6th commandment gets revised here. The 6th commandment was, no animal shall kill any other animal. But, Napoleon's had some animals killed, and so they changed it to say, no animal shall kill any other animal without cause. Squealer, somehow tries to cover this up. These other animals are like, oh, I don't know, but what are they going to do? Napoleon becomes more and more paranoid. But the animals somehow, with all that's going on, they complete the construction of the second windmill. So then once that's done, here comes another, another counterinsurgence. Like, so that some of the farmers around, they don't want animals running a farm anywhere near them. So Frederick, a human, he outwits Napoleon and pays him with forged banknotes. And then he brings in a militia and they explode the windmill. Well, this brings the farm animals together again and kind of rallies them behind Napoleon because they're pissed. They built this windmill and Frederick comes in and has it blown up. They get enraged and they just drive Frederick and his men out. And they lose several of their farm animals in the battle, their comrades. This is done. Everybody's celebrating, and the pigs are celebrating by drinking Jones's whiskey. and they have a really raucous night. And then the next day, you see that one of the commandments is reworded again. No animal shall drink alcohol. They add to excess at the end of it. So no animal shall drink alcohol to excess. It's chapter 8, more shenanigans.
Yep, more rewriting of those commandments. And this chapter was hard too because this was the second time they built this windmill. I think in the book it talks a lot about Boxer working the hardest on the
Mm.
windmill,
Oh, yeah.
and it's destroyed again. Terrible.
Yeah, he would work over like extra hour or something all the time. Yeah,
He
crazy.
would.
You gotta love Boxer. Loyal, but man, we'll see. We'll see more about Boxer. So, chapter 9. Okay, they're not gonna give up on this windmill. So they begin rebuilding the windmill for a third time, and the food becomes scarce, even more scarce than before. And rations are reduced for all the animals except for the dogs and the pigs. And these animals do really start to feel this suffering. But Squealer points out that in the days of Jones, they had been slaves and now they are free, and that makes all the difference. They're just starving and tired and wondering what the heck's going on. Napoleon, during all this stuff, he's fathered a bunch of pigs. He's got all kinds of pigs running around, and pigs are starting to get out of hand, and they start brewing beer for themselves. And Moses, he comes back into this scene again. I got to mention him every time, and with his crazy ideas, a sugar candy mountain. And then, but during all this, Boxer been working his butt off. He's getting old, and Boxer becomes ill. This is a hard chapter. Napoleon sells him to be slaughtered for glue. Pigs are drinking whiskey and being butt heads. Anyway, so that's how this chapter ends, with the pigs drinking whiskey. They love their whiskey. Any comments?
Yeah, the scene in this chapter with Boxer being put into the truck, and I can't remember what it says on the side of the truck, but it definitely the animals are able to decipher that Boxer is not going to the doctor. And like them having that realization was a really hard read. Life on the farm is definitely worse. Squealer sure does know how to spin a tale, though, and those pigs are loving their whiskey.
They're loving their whiskey. It's so crazy. Yeah, I forget what exactly it says. It let them know that Boxer is going to be sold for glue, and they're trying to go after it, and it's sad.
Mhm.
All right, this is the last chapter, chapter 10, and years pass now. This after all this purge and after the whiskey drinking and Boxer being sold for glue. Years pass and a new generation comes around. They kind of forget. Few can remember the days of the rebellion. So it's a new generation. The farm is more organized and prosperous. Uh, Somehow it seemed as though the farm had grown richer without making the animals themselves any richer, except for, of course, the pigs and the dogs. And, so everybody knows this as the order of the day now. Pigs and dogs, they get whatever they want. Everybody else just has to step in line, every other animal. So the other animals, as always, are generally hungry. They slept on straw. They drank from a common pool. They labored in the fields, and they dealt with the elements. This is where it gets absurd. The pigs began walking on two legs in this ceremonial, and seeing this sheep change their slogan. They 2 legs good, 4 legs bad, and they reverse it, and they say 4 legs good, 2 legs better. This is the end of the chapter almost, and the 7 commandments are now condensed to all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And that's what, so Clover walks into the barn and sees that they've changed the commandments to this one commandment. And she asked the donkey to read it, and he does. And it says this: all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The pigs began entertaining humans in the farmhouse, and Napoleon makes an alliance with the human farmers. And this is the end of the book. And the very last line, I think, is telling, and it's quoted a lot. And I'll just read it. The creatures outside looked from pig to man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. We did it. What do you think?
Yeah, this last chapter was so like the pigs are sleeping in the beds, they're wearing clothes, and now they're walking on two legs. It's everything they're not supposed to be doing. Life on the farm for the other animals is just awful. And I think even in the scene with the farmers say something to the pigs that's to the effect of, it's amazing how horrible you're treating all the animals on your farm and how much money you're making.
Yeah.
And so that was a crazy line, and then, of course, yeah, this last line was chilling that they can't even tell the pigs apart from man anymore.
Yeah, yeah, very chilling. Okay, that was tough, and we're gonna have to transition to something else with, usually any classic literature, you can find something in the pop culture of today that references it. Do you know of anything?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are tons of cultural references out there to Animal Farm, but definitely personally, when I was reading about it, I was thinking a lot about The Hunger Games, which is definitely one of my favorite series that I read in my youth, and I think the politics, are considered very Orwellian. It's a dystopian story, and there are similar politics. There's a lot of propaganda. There are two separate people. There's the capital, which we can compare to the some animals are more equal than others. The people of the capital are considered better than the people of the districts, and they're treated as such. Then the districts suffer under the capital's rule, much like the farm animals in Animal Farm. There's also a rebellion in this story where the leader of the rebellion, like Napoleon, is deemed to be pretty much just as bad as who they're trying to overthrow. So I think there are a lot of comparisons here for Animal Farm and the Hunger Games.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we better wrap this up. But we said we were going to ask and answer three questions. We did. I'll just go through the first one was who is usually assigned this, and we answered that. And then why is it considered difficult? And we hit on that. I think it was definitely difficult as we talked. There's some tough content in here. What did you think about it?
Yeah, overall, I think it was an easy read despite my personal hesitations. I think if you're not very familiar with, the history that it's trying to cover, it can be easy to miss a lot of those references. So this conversation was even helpful for me, knowing the comparisons. But overall, it is the point of the book is to, take these political ideologies in a way that is easy to understand with farm animal language. So I think that it was an easy read in that sense.
Yeah, definitely an easy read, and it explains complex things that happen, complex political and historical events, but an easy read overall. So their last question we answered, was it worthwhile or was it enjoyable or at least worthwhile? And I think to me this falls in the category of worthwhile. It was a good read, but it was actually difficult to get through some of the content, I believe.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's worthwhile. I think that it covers important topics. But yeah, as an animal lover, some of the content was very hard for me. I would definitely not consider it enjoyable, but I do think it's worthwhile.
Yeah. And I think they got cats dead on there with the cats just
Yes,
showing up whenever, just in time to eat, but never do any work and not really
definitely.
participating in any of the meetings. All right, let's do the quote of the week. And this is actually the quote toward the end of the book when Clover notices that the commandments have changed on the wall. So I'll let you read the part of Clover, and I'll be Benjamin. I was trying to think of the name of the donkey. It's Benjamin. So, all right, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Oh,
My sight is failing. Even when I was young, I could not have read what is written there, but it appears to me that that wall looks different. Are the seven commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin?
the sign reads, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." Okay, final thoughts, Shelby.
My final thoughts are I think that this book is a really good reminder to be on the lookout for propaganda. Make sure you're checking your news sources and always question when you hear something like, this is just the way it's always been.
Definitely. I think our time period, we need to do that now more than ever. It's hard to know. what's accurate. And it's easy to get on a bandwagon and equate certain people with certain things, and maybe you just should check it out. And I won't even say too much about AI, but it makes the process even more difficult. All right, this concludes this episode. This was episode number 3. We close the chapter on Animal Farm. On the next episode, I think we'll take on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I think we're going to do that with the producer. And Shelby, I think you know who the producer is, but I don't want to reveal that until next time. So in the meantime, grab a book, grab a brew, and have a good week. Thank you so much, Shelby. You were great.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll see you next time. Beast of England, beast of Ireland, beast of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time. Soon or late the day is coming, tyrant man shall lose his throne, and the fruitful fields of England shall be trod by beasts alone. Rings shall vanish from our noses, and the harness from our back. Bit and spur shall rust forever, cruel whips no more shall crack. Riches more than mind can picture, wheat and barley, oats and hay, clover beans and mango wurzels shall be ours upon that day. Bright will shine the fields of England, purer shall its waters be, sweeter yet shall blow its breezes on the day that sets us free. For that day we all must labor, though we die before it break. Cows and horses, geese and turkeys, all must toil for freedom's sake. Beast of England, beast of Ireland, beast of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of our golden future time.